Kingdomtide. Written by Rye Curtis. Read by Joanna Perrin and Maggie-Meg Reed. For Mimi. Part 1.
I no longer pass judgment on any man or woman. People are people, and I do not believe there is much more to be said on the matter. 20 years ago I might have been of a different mind about that, but I was a different Cloris Waldrip back then. I might have gone on being that same Cloris Waldrip, the one I had been for 72 years, had I not fallen out of the sky in that little airplane on Sunday, August 31st, 1986. It does amaze that a woman can reach the tail end of her life and find that she hardly knows herself at all. I sat by the window, and my dear husband, Mr. Waldrip, sat on my right. He had his hands busy fiddling with a ragged cuticle. My husband was a kind, bird-faced man, and he wore strong glasses. He was born in Amarillo, Texas, to an awning salesman and a midwife. I first ever laid eyes on him in the summer of 1927, at a county dance in the town hall. This was after his family had moved some 60 miles east from the big noisy boomtown of Amarillo to little old Clarendon, where I was born and raised. He was a terribly handsome boy, tall and dark-haired. However, he wore a little blue cap that made him look mighty silly. We were both only kids. I had just turned 13. He gave me a pitifully wilted rose he had stolen from Mrs. McKee's garden. On that morning in August of 1986, he had a dab of jalapeno jelly on his chin. It had been there since our complimentary breakfast at the Big Sky Motel in Missoula, Montana. I was going to tell him to use the handkerchief I had embroidered with his initials and given him so many Christmases before, but he had already begun for the pilot a monologue on rainfall. Such was his custom with men he had just met. Mr. Waldrip had arranged for us to take a scenic flight to an airfield near a cabin we had rented in the Bitterroot National Forest. The pilot he had hired was a strong, well-groomed young man by the name of Terry Squime. Terry was not a hair over 30 and was newly wed. He showed us a photograph of his bride. She was pretty and resembled Catherine Drewer, a rude and frustrating brunette woman I knew from our church, First Methodist. Only Mrs. Squime was quite some years younger and had a jaw less like a shoehorn and a nose less like an old mushroom. When I would later come to know Mrs. Squime, whom I have cautioned against reading certain passages of this account, I would find her to be a pleasant and selfless young woman, and to be very little like Catherine Drewer at all. Mr. Waldrip carried on about rainfall and the nuisance of beavers, and I returned to looking out my little window. The Cessna 340 is a little twin-propeller airplane of 6 seats, and ours had taken off from an airfield outside of Missoula, and was flying south over the Bitterroot Mountains. I mean to tell you, these are mountains, the kind that remind a person, no matter how old they are, that they are infinitely young to the earth. These mountains are edged and scalloped like gigantic kin to the arrowheads my little brother Davy, God rest his tiny soul, unearthed in Palo Duro Canyon when we were small. I had lived 72 years in the Texas Panhandle, and mountains are not a geological feature you will find in that country. The land is as flat can be, level with what is level in the constitution and spirit of the people who walk it. We plains folk are a grounded people, and rarely see a mountain. But having seen what I have now seen of them, when I say these were mountains, you would be right to believe me. I was then 54 years married to Mr. Waldrip. We lived in a little brick ranch house in the orbital shade of a municipal water tower that serviced the some 2,000 thirsty souls in Clarendon. Only the day before we had locked up the front door and had taken the truck to the airport in Amarillo, where we had then flown, with a quick stop in Denver, to Missoula on a jet airplane. We did not often venture far from our little house, and this was to be the first trip we had taken in a good long while.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?